Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of your safety and your own personal safety, we ask that you keep a close watch on your carry-ons and personal belongings.
Welcome to the AeroExploration podcast, where aviation's past, present, and future meet. We explore the stories that build aviation history, take you inside the industry today, and uncover the career paths and innovations keeping the industry in motion. We go behind the scenes, into the cockpit, and onto the ramp, meeting the people and discovering the places that define aviation. If it's part of the flying world, you'll find it here. This is AeroExploration.
Welcome, everyone, to the AeroExploration podcast. My name is Jim, and I'm your host. I'm glad you're able to join me because on this episode, we're going to be talking about some really interesting stuff in military aviation, specifically the gunner positions. But we're also going to talk about the challenging aspects of that job and how these days the Air Force is doing a little bit of a better job of taking care of our people. I was honored to be able to get to bring on a U.S. Air Force Combat Special Missions Aviator in Anthony Dyer, who has also written a book about his journey through military aviation, as well as the struggles that he had with that along the way. Before we get into that, just a couple things about the YouTube channel. Some of the videos slowed down a little bit for good reason. I've been doing some more studying on my CFI ratings, so the videos are going to keep coming out. They just won't be as frequently with the shorts and things like that. So as I have some time, I'm going to put together some videos, and I'll preload and schedule those to publish out. But it may not just be on a regular schedule like you've been seeing over the last month or so. Have no fear, though. I do have a couple of really good ideas plugged in there and already pre-recorded. I just have to go through and edit them, and then I'll start publishing those again. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the change in pace of the podcast has been really positive. I've gotten a lot of really good feedback, and I want to reach out to all of you and ask if you have a topic that you want covered, or if you have a story worth telling, or aviation career change, or just want to talk about your career in aviation in general, please reach out to me. My email address is jim@flyingmidwest.com, or any of my social medias, which is at @aero_exploration. And lastly, a huge call to action for those of you who are listening and enjoying what I'm doing. As we've moved in this new direction with the podcast, I really want to try to get the word out there. So if you could kindly go on wherever you're listening to this podcast, leave me a rating, leave me a review. I love to read reviews on the podcast. It helps to boost my energy as I build these podcast episodes out. But it also helps to boost the recognition of this podcast. In addition to that, if you could share this podcast far and wide with whoever you think could benefit from it, I would greatly appreciate it. It helps spread the word of the podcast and spread the message of what we're trying to do here. And not that this is typically a news-based podcast, but one thing I did want to talk about is that the House of Representatives passed the Mental Health and Aviation Act of 2025 unanimously, and it will be moving on to the Senate. This is big news for mental health and aviation, because it is going to push the FAA to modernize its mental health policies and practices. Several ways, including revising FAA regulations that would otherwise discourage aviation professionals from seeking mental health treatment. It's going to remove some of those barriers from disclosing mental health care needs. It will also allocate funds to address the huge backlog in medical certificate processing and hire and train more aeromedical examiners with psychiatric and psychological experience. There's still a lot of work to be done on this, but a lot of good things have gone into this already. I'm obviously really passionate about this topic, and I hope that they continue to work to make improvements to mental health care reform within aviation. But the passing of this represents a huge step towards reversing some of the culture of fear that people in aviation have around mental health, whether it be pilots or controllers being afraid to reach out for help or being afraid to disclose when they have sought help. It just seems like a really bad combination of things when you've got people in some pretty high-pressure jobs that aren't able to seek out proper care to be able to deal with that. And again, I am aware that a lot of that stuff has started going down the right direction, but to have this act pass, I think, is a huge step in the right direction for more widespread reform. So if we think civilian or professional aviation is a stressful and challenging job, imagine compounding that exponentially by adding in the element of working military fire missions. Well, that is exactly the topic of a new book out right now by Anthony Dyer called Moonchild, The Roots and Wings of a USAF Combat Special Missions Aviator. Anthony goes beyond just talking to us about the mission itself. He goes deeper than that and talks about the perseverance it took to be successful and how the men and women that we put into those roles are ordinary people that are thrust into extraordinary circumstances, but must continue to execute high-risk missions under relentless pressure. So without further ado, welcome Anthony Dyer. All right, well, Anthony, good morning. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. I'm super excited to have you here and excited to talk about your military experience, some of the things you've gone through, and your book.
Hey, good morning, Jim. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So you were in the military and you ended up in an aviation role. Is aviation something you were always interested in?
Yeah, I always knew at a young age it would take a big part of my life in, some way, shape, or form. I was the only, before, when I was a kid, I had a little helicopter flight over Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and one of my friends I grew up with, her dad paid for it. And, I knew at that moment, just looking at the earth from that, that perspective and everything, that's in some way, I would somehow be a part of this. I didn't really dwell on it too much, through my high school years. And then, I get to the, my senior year in high school where my dad gives me that typical dad talk, right, of time to get a job, go to college, to get out. And yeah. And I didn't get into to flying till about 10 years after, my 10-year mark in the Air Force, and I retrained into, I was aero gunner then, now a special missions aviator. Got to fly very privileged to fly on the AC-130 gunship, and the Pave Hawk helicopter.
Yeah, those are some pretty unique roles, especially in the Air Force, to get into. So thanks for your service with that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So what was your route into the military then? Was that you're coming up to the line, dad's like, hey, figure it out, kid, and you're like, I'm going to go join the Air Force.
Yeah.
How did that work for you?
Yeah, so I had talked to after that talk with dad, a Navy recruiter, and he was, talking about being on a boat for 6 months, and I didn't really like that. Thought, and then an Army.
Good call.
Yeah, and then an Army recruiter. Then I was like, my dad was actually in the Air Force for 4 years down at MacDill. And this is way before I was born. He was a communications guy. And, I was like, talked to him about the quality of life at the Air Force and the TDY, the golf clubs, the things that, good chow halls, right? Things that come with the Air Force. And I was like, it sounds like a good path. And, those core values they instilled in us, even in basic training. I didn't know what they really meant, man, until later in my career, but, they were just words at that point. And then I was soon to find out this.
Okay. So as you go in, what career track did you take?
Yeah, I started out as a weapons loader. It was a 2W1. I think it's still that to this day, the AFSC for that. And then it's called load tows. It's a fancy way of saying a guy who loads the bombs and missiles. And, usually there was a 3-man crew, from a 1-man, 2-man, and 3-man. I was the guy that drove the jammer, the little hydraulic thing that looks like a frog.
Okay,
that's what they call us load toads. I loaded the F-15 Strike Eagle at Seymour Johnson was my first base, and this is even pre 9/11. And then then I did the 16s out at Korea and the Flying Fiends out there in Osan. Then Tyndall's Season D's, and then I retrained the first time into the aircraft firefighter, Air Force firefighter. And then I was there some really good moments in the firehouse there at Charleston Air Force Base for about 5 years. Then once long story short, man, I was at a pizza parlor, one of my friends back home actually on leave, my 10-year mark, and I look out, and I see the same cracks in the road. What I mean by that is I'd realized I'd really been sort of in my eyes sitting on the sidelines in the war on terror. I was like, man, you only live once, right? And I don't want to leave cracks, I want to leave kraters, and to do that, I knew I was going to have to learn to walk and fly with giants. The AC-130 definitely gave me the opportunity to leave at least a small footprint on the earth, I think, and like I said, what's this brief mortal life if not the pursuit of legacy, so.
Wow, that's a great way to put it. I'm going to go back to 9/11 for just a second. So being a load toad, as you're calling it, during 9/11, I'm assuming that your posture at your base at the time wasn't like you're constantly having aircraft loaded up and on alert, or were you prior to 9/11?
Prior to 9/11, no, not at all. I remember I was on what we call mid-shift back then, and it was basically where, you worked from midnight to 8, give or take. And then, I remember I was sleeping, and then I was in the dorms, and showing my age here a little bit, but my buddy beat on the door, and we go to what was a day room, like a common area for everybody, if you remember those. Yeah. There was like a tube-style TV, and it was the first plane had hit. I don't know if this is around 9 a.m.-ish or something like that. Then the second plane hit, and I knew that, at this point that, the country's, this has changed us forever, right? Like this is hit on American soul, right? And I thought about those 343 firefighters that ran in that day. So there was that was sort of the spark in me, like, man, I want to do more. Like, what's different in those guys' DNA, right? And that ran in those towers where everybody else runs out. Like, I want to be that guy, like, in my mind, At that point, I knew I was going to retrain in the fire department later. And, I did that my 5-year mark. And, and part of that, get into flying part, when I was at that crossroads, when I'm thinking about the same cracks in the road, and I got back to the firehouse from being on leave, and ironically, there's a book there, and it was a Dick Couch. It's called by Dick Couch, called Chosen Soldier. And what that is about the Green Beret teams and what they go through. And, they, the Isaiah 6:8, the send me verse was the prologue to that book, But this was before the movie Fury made it famous and all that. But, I was like, man, like that hit. And I definitely want to be on the point of that, that spirit. Right. And I knew physically, like realistically, I couldn't be an operator. Right. But, the water's a great equalizer. But what I could do is fly on the gunship and, make sure, guys on the ground got home. And that's what I prided myself. That was my whole why, my whole reason. And, when the dust settles and that's over, that, that sense of identity, when you get out, that's a real thing you struggle with.
Sure. So you make this choice to go down the road of becoming the special ops aviator. What does that pathway look like when you made a decision to retrain? I assume that you have to start some paperwork processes. Kind of walk us through what that looked like for you to get into that role.
Yeah. I remember there was the NCO Corp retraining program. I don't even know if they still do that today, but it's, guys for a little later in their career, staff tech sergeant types ranks. And I filled that out. And then, first choice I got it, only choice aero gunner, and then, man, I remember signing a letter. I haven't talked about this yet, but there was a letter basically saying like, hey, like, I understand basically what I'm getting into, the ops tempo and everything that comes with this job, and, and when I went to basically my, the aircrew fundamentals part down at Lackland, that was about a 2-week course. And then I went to what was then basic aero gunner. And what they did was they combined us with the flight engineers, and, you get to learn, multiple different, just the very basics of these weapon systems, and for example, like the gunship back then was, the 40 mil Bofors, and still to this day, the 105 howitzer. And, you learn a little bit about the minigun in case you went rotary wing and 50 cal. And, then I went to the 3.5 week survival course up at Fairchild, SEER school. And then that was some of the best training I've ever had in my life, man. I definitely don't want to ever do that again, man. I think I lost like 15 or 20.
I've heard that.
Yeah, that last week, I think I lost like 15 or 20 pounds, like, without even trying, man. Yeah. And then I did to what was then just water survival school was done in Pensacola, Florida. They would drop you off in the Gulf, man, and, basically parasail and like you're parachuting in, like a very basic parachutist type course. And then at that point, I went to what was then the 551st, Cannon Air Force Base Special Operations Training Squadron. And that's where I learned my initial qualification. And there's about 4 months of academics, if you will, 3 to 4 months of academics before I even got on my first flight, and I get in. Yeah, it's a sort of funny moment. I get in the book there. I wrote my first training flight ever, man. It went so bad to where, like, my flight instructor says something to the effect of like, you're the reason they have to brief seatbelts on airliners, right? And it went that bad, man. But what he did ask me was like, man, he's like, what's the most important word, in the dictionary? I was like, I don't know, man. I'm licking my wounds, feeling sorry for myself, right? And he's like, it's perseverance, and I want you to think about that before what that word means before the next flight. And after that, I got it, man. They just want to see you get back up, and this whole theme of perseverance, I leaned on that a lot throughout my career, what that word means.
And I imagine that the novice listening might be like, man, a 4-month school to learn how to load up a gun. But I have to imagine it's way more complicated than that. I'm sure you have to learn the whole weapon system, malfunctions. And it's not just take shell, put in gun, go boom. There's got to be a lot more to it.
Yeah. And for AC-130 gunners, especially, like, your meat and potatoes is, like you said, your weapon systems, being the weapons expert of the crew. And, that's knowing everything from, you're talking about like a page long of memorization of your cycle of operations, like word for word, and you get, back then it would get graded if you got even like left the word "the" out, like that's a point, this is a point, and then you had to learn your malfunctions like inside and out, man, to the point where, like, I know it sounds simple, like, hey, I got a gun malfunction on the 40 mil, right? failure to extract or something like that. And then, but if you can't recognize that and clear that out and get the gun back online, you could imagine a JTAC or some Green Berets getting lit up on the ground, and you can't figure out what's wrong with your gun. Like you didn't want to be that person, right? So you wanted to be that expert of the crew and, get that gun back online and get those rounds out, Yeah,
100%. So once you're done with training, what does the mission look like for you after that?
Yeah, so I did my multiple trips to Bagram there. My very first trip, it was really slow, to be honest with you, man. This was 2011, probably fall time. And I remember like we flew and we, you always want to get to your first shoot under your belt, and it's doing basic ISR type stuff over these different missions, and then one night we had landed, and the sun's getting ready to come up, and basically I was reloading the tweak rounds. And what that is like, if you think about it, if you line your sights on any weapon, you have to use a few rounds to do that, right? So same thing goes with a gunship,
sure. Yeah.
And about 7 or 8 rounds, I'm reloading the 105, back in the ashes. And then the pilot comes back to the bat and he's like, hey, there's a Green Beret team getting lit up. And, he's like, they're pinned down. He's like, I know the sun's coming up. And the gunship usually doesn't fly in, even a little bit of daylight for things to happen back in Desert Storm. But, he's like, who's with me? And, we were all like, send me, man. And I remember just this moment of, we're flying, we take off as soon as we can. We get overhead the operation, and, I see multiple RPG flashes, and what it was like 3 Taliban guys had explosive packs on, and they were lighting up their Green Berets. And then at that point, the Green Beret or the JTAC, you could hear the intensity of his voice, you're clear to engage. And, just this, man, like I knew my life was going to change forever. And I got on the 40 mil. We shot about, I think it was like 60 rounds, give or take. And then, there were secondaries. And I just remember this moment after all the dust and the adrenaline settles, like, man, I got to do more for my family or my country in an hour-and-a-half flight than I'd done my whole life, and that's a surreal moment.
Oh, I bet. So as you're on these missions, I mean, you're not just talking with the crew. I mean, are you hearing the JTACs on the ground too?
Oh yeah. And the thing about the gunship especially is you have that primary radio with the JTAC, and he's always usually like a combat controller with like a ground force commander, right? With, the JTAC certification for those guys. And, 9 times out of 10, that's who we're talking to. And, you can always tell, man, like the intensity in their voice, how, I don't know how else to say, but how quick and how fast and accurate they need those rounds, and then at the time we had 13 crew members all working together in this organized chaos to get, these rounds out, and save those guys' life, man. And to me, that's what it was always about. I remember when I was struggling with my why a lot towards the end of my career, and I remember there was this letter that was from a Ranger from the 75th, and he's holding his baby girl, and he's like, man, he's like, it's a thank you guys, thanks to the gunship and your guys' rounds, like, I got to go home and see my girl, and I was like, man, this is what it's all about,
Yeah, right. 100%. Did you get to interact much with the guys that were on the ground beyond just, the radio calls? And
oh yeah. Yeah, there was there would be like there's even back home there's different exercises like, Emerald Warrior, man, where you're getting special operators from all across the globe, and you're briefing, you're telling them your capabilities, the things you can do, things you can't do, and how many rounds you carry, etc. And then like even downrange before, like, if they're going after a big shot right on the ground and they want to bag and tag and we get some info out of them, like, they brief like sort of brief you what to expect, and they give you some products and things like that. And then, even after every shoot, there's always a debrief usually. And, those guys would come to the talk after they exfilled, and they'd always beat us back, but, they would brief us, hey, this is what happened. This was the money made on this operation. Right. And it was always cool interacting with those guys and just hearing the things from their perspective, on the ground, like, man, like, that was close air support, really close, but like we made it,
Yeah. It's got to be really rewarding though to get to talk with those guys afterwards and see. I mean, you can obviously see and hear the difference real time, but to like get their perspective afterwards, that's got to be really powerful.
Oh yeah, and those, it's I always look. There's a certain amount of respect for those guys too, because they're the guys that
Yeah.
I think I mentioned in the book, they're the guys that Heraclitus talks about, right? The 1 in the 100, right? They really are America's finest, and they're at that very pointy edge of that spear, and just like to hear them talk about like, how we walked the rounds on to kill the bad guys to get them home, and and how close to the calls things were, and like we glad things like we were glad you guys were there when you were, because if it had been 5 minutes later, things like that, right? That's when it really hits you. Like, man, this is a certain amount of just almost a sacred promise that we have with those guys, like to like whatever they're going through on the ground, we're going to do everything we can to get those guys home.
Yeah, that's got to come with a lot of weight though too on your shoulders.
Oh yeah. It's one of those things, especially in that world, man. Like it's, I always say it's not what you do in flying that haunts you. It's what you don't do, right? And if an Eagle, if American doesn't make it back, which that happened later in my career on the Pave Hawk helicopter, that does weigh with you, man. You live with that forever, and the mind's a tricky thing, man. And you start asking yourself those questions, like if I'd have been there 1 minute earlier, 10 minutes early, would it have mattered, right? And stuff like that.
Yeah. That leads a little naturally into my next question of like, what are the challenges of this job? I'd imagine that's got to be one of the big ones. But in addition to that, what kind of challenges do you face in this type of work?
It's the most I've ever had to study for anything in my whole life, man. I remember like, just thinking at one point, like, you're getting the crap kicked out of you, man, like knowledge and proficiency wise, they're testing your knowledge constantly, right? And like, you just have to know so many different things, like inside and out, and if I would have studied that hard for anything else in life, I'd be like a doctor or a lawyer. There's that level, that level of studying that goes into just one flight, man. Just the fatigue, man. And when you're downrange, man, and you're flying, I think we're allowed 330 as an aviator, 330 flight hours in I think it's like a 90-day period, and you get those so fast before they sit you down. They have to. There's waivers for everything. However, usually that's a serious one where they sit you down. But even when you're down, man, you're like, I want to get back in the air. Like this, I want to get back up there, right? And there's always that tug of war.
So with that, like when they sit you down, is that, I guess, purpose-wise, is that just to give you a mandatory break from the physical aspects, the mental, or is it like a combination thereof, or just some reg that exists because you don't know why?
No, it's a combination of, the physical part of that being, everything, especially on the Ace model, we didn't even pressurize on that thing, man. And like, if we're above, 10,000 feet, we're on the, the oxygen hose, right? And, you're breathing this, you're way up there, man. And everything at altitude is 10 times harder than, for whatever reason, that, ground level, no G-forces, stuff like that. And then the mental aspect of it, you do get tired, which sort of ties into physical a little bit, but, you have to rest the mind too. You know what I mean? Like it's a muscle in itself, and
100%.
You have to get that good reset day, and I remember back then what we would do was like, you would have usually to mitigate that 3 weeks of flying. And then there was 1 week of you're on the plans crew. And what I mean by that is like, studying operations coming up, pre-fighting aircraft for the guys to get it ready. That way they can just launch if they have to. So it was a really, you see everybody's part in all this, and it takes every person in the Air Force to get one round out, right? So the way I've always looked at it.
Yeah, that's so true. So in those 3 weeks, how much are you flying? Is it this like every day or?
Yeah, it was, man, there was, I think my longest mission I did was 11 points, almost 12 hours, 11.7.
Okay.
I just remember, man, after one of those, your whole body just hurts, bro. Like it's just hard to explain.
Yeah, I bet.
And then, there's flight docs, and they give you tools, I guess you would say, and, to get some good sleep and stuff like that, and, medication, stuff like that. And you basically what was hard on the gunships was like, we would always fly at night, so you'd sleep during the day. And man, and for whatever reason at Bagram, man, there was always like some construction project going on in the thing adjacent to you, right? So you have to, headphones, whatever you got to do to get some sleep. So.
Well, and I have to imagine you're on Bagram. It's an air base. It's not like they're probably not launching aircraft during the day too.
Yep. Yeah, it's a lot of.
It's not like they're quiet.
yeah, and if it is aircraft, it's a fighter, right? If it's in the daytime, because guys get way up there. Yeah. So, but there was all kinds of stuff, man. Like I remember just construction, just the traffic on. Remember the Disney, the route there and everything. People would run and stuff on them. But it was always hard to get sleep, but we always managed, man. And those down days, we definitely had fun, man. Took advantage of it. There was PlayStations, the MWR, the movies, you name it. We had it, man. So
It's one of the perks of the Air Force, I bet, as opposed to the Army or the Navy. Or
100%. Yeah.
So what brings you then from the AC-130 gunship into the mission of the Jolly Greens or the Pave Hawks?
Yeah. So I had always, like, throughout my career, there's this theme of, like, me feeling like this desire, like I've never really done enough. You know what I mean? I always wanted to test myself,
Sure. Yeah,
test my mettle. And, you know, I basically, man, I was like, I want to get closer and closer to the fight, right? And you know, and basically, I always want to be a helicopter gunner, traditional, what we consider like the whole 9 yards gunner, right? Like the Vietnam era type, you know, door gunner. And I was like, yeah, I want to do this. There was an opportunity when there's a manning shortage in those units, and you know, I told my chief, my functional, hey, like I want to go, like send me, and I want to be I want to go to the Jolly Greens. Sure enough, man, I got back from my last. At this point, we were hitting ISIS and stuff on the gunship, and I got back from that trip, and then I put in for it, and then I got assigned to the 41st Rescue Squadron, and man, it was I had to really forget everything I thought I knew about flying. You look at a helicopter, right, and you're like, how does this thing fly? You know, little things
right.
like, you know, like the tail rotor provides 2.5% of lift, stuff like that, like all this different knowledge you have to know, and on that one, you're a flight engineer and a gunner, you know, and just a level of knowledge.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. On the Pave Hawk nowadays, it's the Special Missions Aviator is a combination of the flight engineer and the gunner, you know, and you know you're doing everything from hoisting to deploying the fast rope for the PJs, and the whole reason behind the Jolly Greens, that little history there, is because in Vietnam when they would come in to rescue someone, they would land on the rice paddy fields, and by the time they left, it looked like two green footprints on the paddy fields there, and that's where you get the green feet, you know. But yeah, it was just a really that's one of those jobs you never want to have to do, man. I get that now. That's one of those, you know, it is someone's either worst or possibly last day, and you know, but at the same time, man, if somebody's number's called and their back's against those, well, those green feet are coming, man, and that's what I wanted to do, and the Air Force David gave me that opportunity to do that.
So for that mission itself, I mean, you talk about you have to know not just the gunnery job, but you have to do some flight engineer stuff as well. Was there a lot of cross training that you had to do between the gunship to flying on the Pave Hawk?
Yeah. One of the first things I had to do, well, after I got my Form 8, I had to go to back to the SEER school, which to do the Dunker. And if you ever heard of this, it's basically where they get a helicopter fuselage, and you know, and they roll it over and over, and they put you underwater, and you have to escape, you know. And man, I get to the last iteration where they give you the smoked out goggles, so that, you know, you're blindfolded essentially, and you're trying to like basically, you know, escape with your Heats bottle, and I don't know how many feet underwater you are, but you're under there enough, right? And, you know, and that's just a very terrible feeling, man. You got this water coming through your nose, and I couldn't find this door handle, man. I was probably the closest I ever came to drowning, but for whatever reason, I felt it, man, and I knew I felt it, but they gave me a second chance, and I don't know if that's just a good attitude part of that, whatever the case was. But the SEER guy threw me a bone, and he's like, "Hey, man, you're going to work with this guy for a week. You're going to get ready for this, man. You're going to be good." You know, and sure enough, man, by the time that guy was done with me, and you know what that is being comfortable, being uncomfortable in that very, very uncomfortable position. You know, and once I got through with that, you know, then I went to the 41st there at Moody. And a lot of training, man, and like I would say, like really, the aerial gunner part of that's probably like realistically like 10-20% of that job, you know, where the rest is the flight engineer. Like, you know, you get trained on all these systems, and like it was a different level of knowledge, man. I remember because a helicopter can go down so easy, you know, like they would say, "Hey, draw out the whole fuel system," you know, and I'm like, "What do you mean?" You know, they're like, "Hey, you're a drop of fuel, you know, get to combustion." I just remember it was just that level of knowledge, you know.
I had no idea. I mean, I'm still in awe that, like, in addition to this gunnery work and knowing those systems, that you're also the flight engineer. I had no idea.
Yeah, and what the Air Force did, it was approximately 2013, give or take. But they what they did was they made I call it a Swiss Army knife in the sky, man, where they did they even on gunships, right? They combined aero gunner, flight engineer, and loadmaster all in this. You have this one guy doing all three of these tasks, you know, which means less people on the gunship, you know, 7 people as opposed to 13, stuff like that. It's always hard doing more with less, but I can't really even say jack of all trades, master of none, because you have to know everything, you know, at that point, like everything really well. So
yeah, I bet. So let's talk a little bit more about the mission when you're flying with in the Pave Hawks with the rescue squadrons. I'm sure that most people probably realize that the Jolly Greens, Pave Hawks, we're talking pararescue work and working with PJs. So tell me a little bit about that mission and what is your role? I mean, we've talked about the basics of that, but like, what is your role as we get into planning the mission, going on missions? How do you fit into that piece?
Yeah. So as far as the role, like, you know, you're there, like traditionally, you're there for a personal recovery type role. And, you know, that would be like a behind enemy lines, that movie type scenario where a pilot goes down way behind enemy lines and you're to go get them. However, like mostly like this day and age, you know, it was CASEVAC, you know, where like you get a 9-line and like you get alerted and you go pick up these Cat Alpha patients, and there's the whole golden hour. And the idea what it is like you have an hour to get them back to the operating table or whatever the case is, so they don't bleed out and they can live. You know, I can explain. I can go into a little bit about. I was on a CASEVAC June 8th of 2018, and we'll say East Africa. You know, I tell people I saw the best side of combat search and rescue that day, you know, meaning we saved 5 lives. And then we saw the worst side where, you know, one Eagle, one American, when they got back on the operating table, they perished, you know, and, you know, that one always sticks with me. So it's like I said, it's a job you never want to have to do. If somebody's number is called, I want to be the guy to go, and I always had that mentality going into it. You know, you have to. So we're day 7 out of a 7-day op, and everything's going fine. And that it was basically what it was there was, you know, 40 special operators, and there was a bunch of partner nation guys, and they did a gaff in, meaning they drove in and stuff like that. And they were about 20 miles from the FOB. And then I remember going to the TOC, man, and like everything's normal because it's one of those situations where you're 24/7 holding down the CASEVAC mission. You sleep when you can sleep, eat when you can eat type thing.
Yeah.
Me and my buddy are like, man, I need to get a nap in, right? And like, so everything was going good. I'm like, hey, can I get a nap? Like, yeah, man, everything's looking good. No joke, man. The moment I lay down on my bunk in the tent, like I get like, you know, scramble. And, you know, I run, I think it's like a quarter mile to get to the helicopters, and felt like forever though. Right. And like I get there, then, you know, we take off, man. I remember we go into like a right-hand turn, and this is all within the same minute. The left gunner had a runaway gun, and what it was a sear notch was worn. So basically when he armed it, you know, he had, you know, runaway gun constantly around, just firing in the ground. And I could see the impacts from that. And then I took the flare pins out, you know, and the flares keep us protected against surface air missiles. And, you know, threat was sort of high, you know, and like, so I pulled those out, and water had gotten that panel, the CMDS panel, and long story short, shorted that out where it had that constant voltage. And you jettisoned all of our flares. I could literally feel the heat from the, you know, the ball is a flare, right? And, you know, surprised I have eyebrows left after that, man. And like, you know, there's like this weird 13-minute dole time, and then I'm picking up you know, somewhat of a calls for fire mission from a JTAC, which is very rare to do that on a rescue helicopter with a 50 cal. And so, you know, and there's this moment, man, where like the training kicks in, and you realize like, man, I've been here 100 times in training. Like this is why they're hard on you. This is why you do this over and over and over to where you could literally do it in your sleep, man. You know, the adrenaline comes down a little bit, and you know, you start getting, we had to fight our way in. We had to get like basically 4 gun passes, you know, all 4 guns on target. And there was basically what it was. There was 12 guys in the tree line that were shooting mortars and disc fire at the Green Berets and stuff. So we finally land after about 4 gun patterns, and we pick up our 3 Cat Alphas, and they put one guy near the fuel tanks, and the PJ start giving the tracheotomy, and then another Green Beret beside me, and he had some eye frags, so they had it wrapped up, and then a partner nation guy who got shot in the stomach. And then we take back off, and then I immediately go back into a gun pattern, start shooting, and then the trail helicopter was on the ground picking up their Cat Alphas. And, you know, and there's this moment to where like it, you know, in your mind, you feel like this is taking forever, right? You're like, man, like we have to get this guy back, right? And like, you know, the aircraft commander's like, okay, he's like, you know, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get one more gun pattern, you know, and those guys should be lifting off hopefully by the time we get done with that. And sure enough, you know, we egress, you know, it worked out good. We egress at the same time and got back, you know, and then I put more bullets in my 50 cal, and then we get more gas, we hot gas and stuff like that, you know, engine's still going. We take back off, and the trail had one more guy to pick up, and we immediately went to a gun pattern, man, and I started shooting the tree line again. You know, and I'd seen what they'd done to American at this point, so I was obviously in a rage and stuff, you know. And so get rounds out and then get back, and then, I remember, I'll never forget, man, the more experienced gunner on the left, he's like, they call me Tito as my call sign. He's like, check the, the aircraft for bullet holes, and checking underneath the helicopter, stuff like that. And then, I get to the front of the helicopter, and I see in my pilot's eyes, and face, like, man, we lost an American, and as soon as he got back, he passed, and they just hit me. My whole life changed at that point,
Well, thank you for sharing that with me. I really appreciate you.
No problem at all.
Telling that story. Yeah, that's got to be really heavy.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I eventually, I ended up getting help for that, and, as aviators in these very uncommon jobs, I think what America seems to forget sometimes is we're all very common men and women doing very unnatural, uncommon, extraordinary things, right? And so there is a point in flying too. You're gonna have to take that tactical knee and recognize, like, hey, I need to get some help, man. I need some clarity on this. I need some closure on this. And there was this program, and it was called Preservation of the Force and Family through, a lot of USOCOM units have it and things like that.
Okay.
I ended up getting help, and he did prolonged exposure, and that was the first time I ever told my story, was to the psychiatrist. And I remember, man, there's this point where, like, I had a chip on my shoulder. I'm like, what does this lady know about anything about combat? She gave me the cliche analogy of, like, hey, like, you don't go to a dentist to get your car fixed. Trust me on this. And I trusted her. And then I told the story. I cried, and she cried. And 100 times, she was like, you should tell your story over and over. And I said no. And once I got out, man, and the dust settled, and, I'm struggling with that sense of purpose. I'm drinking a lot, stuff like that. I realized that, man, maybe she's right. Like, maybe I can pay it forward. And, maybe if one person reads this book and gets help, that's a victory. That's a blessing, man. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I was going to say, like, the trauma of that, like, you got to deal with it somehow. And there's a couple avenues you can go down. Some being more productive, and others being kind of that downward spiral. So I'm glad that you were able to get that help and work in a positive direction with it.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I'm a better man for that, and just that accountability matter. When I looked at it, man, I had the conversation with myself, and then my faith in Jesus and stuff, basically when I was drinking that much, right, my wife recognized it, and, she's like, hey, like, basically you either get help or it's me and the daughter. And of course I chose to get help. I'm glad I did, man. What was a pint a day turned into more than a pint on the weekend turned into more of a pint a day just to get sleep, right. And that's always bad when it gets to that level. Now,
were you struggling mostly with trauma from being in the military, or was there also a bit of a combination of, now I'm out, I don't have purpose like I did before, what do I do next? Or is it just a combination of all of that?
Yeah, there was my last year, man, there was a lot going on. Like, the traumas, from the Castovac mission was really still, I was still dealing with that. And then I went back to gunships my last couple of years for my sunset tour here at Cannon Air Force Base. And I do my last trip to Iraq there, and it was just so slow, man. And I saw that the end was near, and a lot of this stuff. And, like, what I mean by that, I was past 20 years. I knew I was going to hit the button when I got back, and just that's my identity, my whole sense of purpose, my why was fading away, right? And I realized that, and that is a hard thing to deal with, man. I had to really, like, basically get over myself a little bit and say, you know what, this thing goes on, right? Like, this machine, this Air Force, like, if you think about it, there's not even a door handle on the other end of that door when you out process to get out of the military, right? And so, you can walk out, but you can really never come back in. Like, it's someone else's job now. And that's a harsh reality. And, and I struggle with that, and what I did, man, was, like, every time, I wanted to drink or whatever the case may be. And I picked up a pen, and, man, and I always had these emotional cobwebs of word. And, I threw it on paper and tried to make sense of this, 2 decades of war and everything that comes with that.
Yeah. So, when you're originally writing, is that mostly just for you as, like, a processing mechanism, or did you plan to do more with that?
So I had a lot of it, like, as a processing method, like, written, with get the help I got, and then stuff like that. And then when I decided to pull the trigger on this thing, I contacted a war journalist, Holly McKay, and she became the editor. And it was really, she was really good at, like, pulling those hard answers out of me, with the questions back and forth with the Word document. And then once we got it done, she's like, hey, I recommend this publisher, which is Robbie Grayson. And he did a phenomenal job with the cover of the book. And in the end, man, like, I still haven't realized, like, I got a book out now. Like, somebody had a gunner the other day, like, man, like, he's like, man, do you realize like you published a book, and it still hasn't really like set in, but you know,
yeah,
I did it for everybody, you know, and the gunship crews and the 60 crews and just aviators, man, or anybody in these uncommon jobs, you know, sort of paint that picture. And another reason is to show America, hey, this is what goes on when you sleep, you know, these things happen.
Yeah, for sure. So you talk about, you know, you're doing this writing, you're working with an editor and a publisher. Like, I mean, obviously it's out now, but like, how did that feel when it first, like, you got it in your hand now? Like, this is real, or did it really kick in?
Yeah, that's a really good question, man. I remember, because what happens is you get like your physical, like your hard copy of your book, you know, and then the publisher, what he does, they buy like 3 copies. They buy one for the editor, one for themselves, and one for you. And you literally go line by line, and you know, you're going to find something, right? It's like proofreading anything, right? And you know, you find that, and man, but as you're doing that, you're reliving this stuff, you know, and you're seeing what was going on in your mind at that moment, that you put on paper for the world to see, right? That's the thing about writing a book. I do sort of like I don't know, just the thrill of like, once you get it out there, it's out there. There's no coming back, you know? I don't know if that makes sense.
Right. It does, because I've said some things in a recorded environment podcast I put out there and go, well, that's out there now. So
yeah.
Because I personally have had my issues with, you know, my own wellness, and I did an episode on it where I talked a bit about it. And I'm like, well, it's out there. Like, this is a thing that I deal with, and that's where, you know, my limits are in aviation, but I chose the path of trying to take care of myself, and these creative outlets like this are important for that. So you're right, it's gone, but hopefully it can resonate with somebody else and go, you know what, this is, like you said earlier, like, we are ordinary people, sometimes thrust into these extraordinary circumstances, and how do we cope with that, you know?
Oh yeah. It's all, you know, like I said, at the end of the day, I'm glad I did it, man. And you know, I'm actually sort of encouraging myself to write more, and I'm working on something sort of grassroots now. And what I really want to do, I was thinking about this, and I'm still looking for input and kicking around some ideas, but basically I want to create a platform, you know, like, you know, I believe every veteran has a story, and some sort of hub, if you will, like, where, you know, that person could publish this and get a book edited for free, you know, to get their story out, because every story does matter, you know. And what I was getting at with the legacy part, man, is like, you know, one day our great grandkids are going to ask what we did in the war, you know, and I think everybody played a part in all these, a big part, you know. And you feel better when you tell that story, because, you know, like, without podcasters, without books, without articles, right, these stories die, man, in the sand over there, and I refuse to let that happen, you know.
Yeah, it's a really powerful statement, and I think that you make a really great point about, like, what does this look like down the road, and how will we share our story?
Appreciate that.
Awesome points.
Thank you.
I'm guessing your intention wasn't initially, I'm going to write this book, I'm going to help other people, but have you found that through talking with people who have read it, or through the process of this, that you have had an impact on others?
Man, it was overwhelming, the amount of like text I got, and like, you know, personal messages from guys I flew with, you know, and they were like, man, like, I struggle with this too. I'm so glad you put it out there. Now I feel like I can put it out there, you know, and stuff like that. And guys really open up to you, man, about what, like, you know, your brothers and sisters, what's bothering them. And you could be that, you know, that voice of reason, and help them out of that situation, man. You know, I even had I had this one guy call me, man, and he was going through a really, really rough time, man. And, you know, I was able to get him the help that he needed at that moment. But yeah, there's just all kinds of, it opened up so many doors I never expected to open, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Did you find, that kind of brings up another question I hadn't thought of, but you got guys saying, hey, I felt the same way, or I experienced the same things. Did you find during your time in aerial gunner work, was there a stigma of talking about stuff like this? Like, hey, we're doing this really important mission, we're doing some badass stuff, but I'm good. I don't need to talk about this. Was there a stigma to that if you thought about talking about it?
Yeah. There was definitely because nobody wants to, it's called duties not to include flying, right? Like, nobody wants to be the aviator to get set down to do, like, you know, admin work while you could be in the air, right? And just like a ground guy doesn't want to get, you know, whether they're SPs or infantry or operators, like, they don't want to get that do not arm for their commander, right? So there was always a fear of that, man. And like, the Air Force, especially when the preservation of the force and family and the MFLAC, these things, these things weren't around a decade ago, man. Like it was like sort of like swept under, I don't want to say swept on the rug, but it wasn't talked about as much as it is now. Because, everybody gets a point where you got to be vulnerable, right? And like to get this off your chest, man, you feel better. But yeah, I saw it do a complete 180 within, I don't know, since 2010, right? 2011. So now it's the norm to get, hey man, this is going to happen. This is part of it. You're going to need help at one point. That's what we have each other for, right? And part of each other is those psychiatrists and those doctors and people that study the mind, stuff like that. They're very well versed in that.
That's great to hear. That is taking that turn. So
yeah, and I remember Admiral McCraven. Believe it or not, man, I was in Bagram 2011, 2012, and he came to the talk, man, and like I remember he was sort of getting into some of this stuff, like, hey, like the basically the H model gunship's going away, but your guys' mission is definitely not. Meaning, like, there's more deployments to come. Like, this isn't over yet,
Okay.
And he touched on like, we're going to cut the deployment cycle, basically what was a 1-to-1 dwell, which meaning like, hey, I would do 90 days there, then 90 days back. He cut that, made it better where you could deploy, realistically once or twice a year. It slowed down, and I get it. Ops tempo is a lot of that, but like at the same time, he recognized sort of the beginning, like, hey man, like there is, a review of this stuff needs to be sort of done, right?
Yeah. Got to take care of our people.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that's actually, I'm glad you said that because, there's 5 soft truths to what we call them. And one of those is humans is more important than hardware. And, that was always when I first started flying sort of lip service. Now it's like people believe in that wholeheartedly,
It's a good shift.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the book a little bit. For those who might be interested, what's the book about? What can they expect from it? And where can they find it?
Yeah, so the book is titled Moonchild. It's the Roots and Wings of U.S. Air Force Combat Special Missions Aviator by myself, Anthony Dyer. And what the Roots and Wings part of that, what that means is like, I grew up deep in Appalachia, man. Basically the morals and the beliefs, and there's some certain things that are Appalachian specific. Growing up, I was taught, and that's my roots, which is great. That's helped molded me right to the man I was to become, and then like. The wings part, I realized, like, like I get to that legacy part where, like, I don't want to leave cracks. I want to leave craters. And, to get wings, I realized I was going to have to, like the poem says, reach out and touch the face of God. And, and wings let me do that. And the Air Force let me do that. And, it's a basic theme of perseverance, and, just the fact that you can learn a lot from aviation in general as far as, like, what it applies to life is like, an aircraft takes off against the wind, not with it. This overall theme of perseverance, and as far as finding it, man, you can find it on Barnes & Noble online, Amazon online, anywhere they sell books online. You can just Google that and it'll come up. And also a Trademarker Media, Robert Grace's page has it there as well.
Do you talk a bit about the stories that you've experienced as well? And then in addition to that, like how you've maneuvered through life to get to a point where you're at?
Yeah, man, it's got everything from, somebody told me the best review I got was like, it's the only book that made them, it's a very short read, but to make them laugh and cry within the same 2 hours, and, but yeah, I put all these, anything from the dark humor moments to the pranks, everything that goes with a deployment, especially a bunch of gunners, right? And then, to my darkest moments of, dealing with trauma and loss and stuff like that. And then, then the decision to get better, to be a better man, to looking at accountability every night and be like, hey man, like, did I make humanity better in any way, shape, or form today?
Sure. Well, Anthony, I cannot thank you enough for coming on, telling your story, being a little bit vulnerable throughout that as well. I think it's really impactful. So, let me ask you this before we leave: what's next for you?
What's next for me is, be the best. Continue to try to be the best dad I could be, the best father I could be, the best author I could be, and I'm gonna definitely get some more stuff out there in the near future,
Love that answer.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your service and everything that you've done for our country. And I just really appreciate you.
Thank you, Jim. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you once again to Anthony for joining me on this episode of the podcast. He certainly does have an inspiring story. We talked to a guy who first joins the military to begin with, but continues to find ways to give of himself for his military career and for his brothers and sisters in arms. So Truly commendable body of work that you have as far as your military career. And now he's put out a book that has hopefully inspired others in their quest to take care of themselves as they deal with these pressures that come from this type of mission. So a couple things I wanted to touch on from my conversation with him is he talks about this concept of leaving craters, not cracks, that he looks at his life and he wants to leave that impact however he can. And it takes a lot of perseverance to be able to be successful with that. And he talks about that as well. One of the great takeaways that I like from that is when he talks about how with aircraft, we take off against the wind. We don't take off with it. So, I mean, suffice to say, we are going to face challenges in life. We need to face them head on and persevere through that. And sometimes in that perseverance, as we're into the wind, we might just take off. But here's the biggest thing that I took away from that conversation. As he put his stories out there and he shared them with others and talked about the struggles he has with finding his purpose and feeling that start to fade as he was looking towards getting out of the military. But he shared those stories, and as he did so, others are like, hey, thanks for putting that out there. I struggle with the same thing too. And while it seems like the Air Force is going down a good path, I think this is an important lesson for all of us that none of us are really going through any of this alone. And most likely the things that you're experiencing or feeling, or even basic flight training, if you're struggling with a certain part of your flight training, someone else has been there and they've struggled through that. Not that I'm trying to compare war to learning your steep turns, but there's some parallels just in the space of when you struggle with things, sometimes someone's already been there. But on the more serious end, if you're struggling with things in aviation, you're having some sort of issue with your finances or struggles with being away from home, I hope that people are able to start taking advantage of resources to talk about those things and share those stories so that we can finally start to get rid of the stigma of mental health, not just in this industry, but everywhere. All right, as I start to wrap up this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe, rate and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. Every little bit helps to spread the word about AeroExploration. Also, if you would like to be a future guest or you have an idea for a future show, email me over at jim@flyingmidwest.com or any of my social medias, which are at aero_exploration. Also, don't forget cold weather merch is now available in the merch store, which is flyingmidwest.com/merch. And if you use code COLD20, you'll get 20% off your next purchase of any of your Aero Exploration gear. All right, that is going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and exploring a little bit of aviation with us. Hope you'll join me again next week as we take another dive into the great stories of aviation. Until then, this is Aero Exploration, and we will see you next time.